From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you, Corey. G'day, everyone. Happy Sunday night. We've got a big one for you tonight. Well, you know by now, Australia didn't just say no, they said hell no. To The Voice, every single state said no. The Northern Territory said no. The only place that voted yes, of course, the super rich people in the inner cities and the bureaucrat class in the ACT. Let's look at these numbers one more time. The latest national numbers, which of course were counted until about 1 o'clock in the morning. This will be updated again tomorrow. There was no official counting that happened today, but basically 60-40, a complete turnaround from where this thing started in the polls at 60-40. In New South Wales, Victoria, Tasmania, you name it, no. Almost 60-40 in New South Wales, 55-45 in Victoria. In Queensland, 68% to 31%. Now, some people like myself didn't quite know what was going to happen in South Australia, and if you really put the proverbial to my head, I would have said it probably was going to vote yes, but no, 64%. Huge there. In Western Australia, again, a thumping vote, 63% no. In Tasmania, again, remember, this was the place that was already being counted in the yes, 60% no. Now, you're going to hear a lot about which booth and all of that voted yes, and which part of the furthest flung parts of the country. The Northern Territory, from Alice Springs to Darwin, from Tennant Creek and beyond, 60-40 to no. The only place that went yes, the ACT. The ACT, with 102,000 people voting, went 60-40. It gives you an insight because all of the political media, of course, live in Canberra. Much of the broadcasting class that talk about that have very heavy connections to the people in Canberra. And, of course, the public service, well, they were also in Canberra. The ritzy parts, as I say, of the inner cities, we all know where that goes. But to give you an idea of not just the overall national total of 60-40, if The Voice was a political party, this is how badly it lost last night. 122 of 151 seats to just 29 that said yes. 10 of those were in New South Wales, 12 of them were in Victoria, 3 of them are the Green seats in Queensland, the Labor seats in the ACT, just 2 seats in Western Australia, just 2 seats in Tasmania, and duck egg, nothing, 0. Not 1 seat in South Australia, and most importantly, the Northern Territory voted for this. Despite the local football team, despite the business, despite the Premier. Now, let's be very clear here. There could not have been better conditions for the Prime Minister to get the result that he wanted. He had, if not all of business, he had the most of business. He had the most of cultural institutions. But on the electoral side of things, the entire map of the country, bar Tasmania, is red right now, with freshly elected Labor governments in places like New South Wales and South Australia, a returned government in Victoria, one that's on the nose in Queensland, and one that, of course, has changed Premier from Daddy to now Roger Cook in Western Australia. All of them voted no. The best way that I can put this about, again, the divide in this referendum, and I'll get in a second to why I don't think this referendum tells us much about the upcoming federal election, but probably delays it for a few months, longer than what the Prime Minister was expecting, is that you had a scenario here where basically the front end of the plane voted yes, the back end of the plane voted no, and the people who don't catch planes, instead they drive everywhere, or they might catch a bus or a train, they said hell no. That's how bad this result actually was. In fact, historically, it's one of the worst of all time in Australia. How's this? 45 referendums, including this one. The Voice is now one of the worst of all time. Just 39% yes, 0 states carried. Of the overall 45, this thing is in the bottom 10 of all time. That's despite the fact that everything was running the Prime Minister's way. Instead, as people learnt more about it, they turned on the idea. Now, you will hear much from the very people who ended up voting yes because the map tells us where these people live. voted yes, that it was all about misinformation. It was about the memes. I mean, don't you love this about the lefties generally? That when they win, it's a revolution forever. When they lose, it's because somebody must have stolen it. The reality is that the same country that has elected Labor governments everywhere rejected this idea. The same country that said yes to same-sex marriage rejected this idea. Now, I think that there's a big step forward in the conversation that will take place here, and I think things might become even a little more radical than some of the conversations that we've had over the past few months, but I'll get to that in a second. But all right, I do this after every election, by-election and all the rest of it. 5 things that we learnt out of the result last night that we will need to digest both now and into the future. Number 1, the arrogance of Albo. The arrogance of Albanese was on show all the way through. Now, he decided on election night to say the first thing out of his mouth was to deliver on that statement and to therefore deliver on a referendum. He did so before there was any plan or mechanism or place to go. Every little moment of this was staged to make it look like the Prime Minister was making history, that the first entry in his Wikipedia page would be the man who delivered this change. Now remember, those aren't members of the public that were standing there and clapping him on. This was after he made yet another of the small movements in this referendum where the hallways were lined with Labor staffers. That's not members of the public, it's Labor staffers that were told, hey, can you come to the ministerial wing and can you line the corridors to make it look like everyone's on side? Now again, part of the arrogance of Albo, remember, even after this thing started to go south, and that was in about June of this year where it went sub 50%, he refused to change the question. He refused to show the draft legislation. Now, he had an opportunity to split a question about recognition and the voice, so maybe one of those two things could have come up. No. He knew better than everyone else. I will not change. To deal with the where's the detail, he could have produced a piece of legislation that says this is the voice in the fully detailed form. How will it be elected? How will it be paid? What are the limits of its powers? All the rest of it. But no. The vibe was going to win because the vibe was winning when he first started talking about it. Remember the countless media appearances where he just refused to answer the direct questions he was being asked because the arrogance was, I've got the formula. I've got a special sync with the Australian people. If Albo wants it and Toto agrees, he thinks that the Australian people were going to be like Toto and just sit in his lap and agree. Well, guess what? They didn't. And also, when this thing started to become very clear that there was virtually no path to 50%, meaning that even if he could win a couple of states, this thing would be gone, he didn't delay so he could change the question, release the draft legislation, or actually start answering proper questions. He didn't cancel it. He didn't delay it. No. This was the moment we had to have. And while a lot of people are going to talk about who is responsible for the pain of the communities that are most affected or the people who voted yes and didn't get the result they wanted, one name and one name only, Albanese. He was in charge of the process the whole way through. The whole way through. Now, last week, while he was crying in the dirt of Uluru, he literally chose that as the priority on Monday of last week rather than going to a synagogue after what had happened when it came to Israel. It was the perfect metaphor of his priorities. And yes, that event was there and he wanted to go there and he cried and it was the greatest honour of his life was to be able to put this before the people. Well, of course, his tactics, his play, his belligerence, while he gets to wrap it all in pretending that it was all about conviction, and geez, won't I get to that in a second. He, of course, ended up sending one final message about his priorities. Again, that event was on, it would have happened without him, but he chose to be there instead of course, going to synagogues like he did later in the week. It was more important for him to sit in the red dirt for the images of history, rather than the history of the day and the priorities that he should have been showing. And then there was that speech. If you stuck around to actually watch his speech, now he had an opportunity. He's obviously hurting, right? Why? Because he's lost so much in all of this. And let's imagine in his heart of hearts this was all and he was all in. But where was the opportunity to say, I could have done this better, take a bit of responsibility? But no, instead, we were right. It was all the media's fault. It was all Peter Dutton's fault. When it was the Australian people who changed their mind. And the Prime Minister kept playing it like it was 60-40 going yes, not 60-40 going no, the whole way through. And then a talking point was sent out to the different corners of the media and the political infrastructure in this country, that rather than the belligerence and arrogance of Albo being the reason that we went through this very long process with hundreds of millions of dollars piddled up against the wall, and once the polling became evident that there would be heartbreak as a result of it, we were told that this wasn't because the Prime Minister was arrogant, not because he was belligerent, but because he was a conviction politician. This is just some of the times it was said in the past 24 hours.
Thank you for the conviction that we've shown.
You know, he's shown a decency and a courage of conviction.
Yes, Australian people want to see conviction.
I had a duty as a conviction politician. We argued for this change not out of convenience, but from conviction.
Seriously? Seriously? Oh, he's a conviction politician. Now, of course, if he was a conviction politician, and as roundly criticised as he would be, he would see, you know what, I'm going to put this to the vote in the Parliament. I'm going to call the Libs on their bluff that they may well back a legislated version of The Voice. Now, he'd be roundly criticised for it because 60% of the country's turned around and said no, but if you're a conviction politician, you'd be willing to bet it all. If you're a conviction politician, you'd be willing to turn around and say, no, this is the central point of my Prime Ministership, I'm all in on this. But instead, he wanted all of the advantage of being all in with none of the consequences. But that, of course, is the way that Albo works, dare I say, the each way of Albo. And he and his mates will have many ways of getting back at the Australian people who voted no, who denied him his place in history. Take your pick. Obviously, in the next week, rather than recognising he could have released the information, he could have answered the questions, he could have delayed, he could have split the question. No, we're just going to change the subject. Oh, this will be the week where he's just wall to wall changing the subject. Expect some sort of delay to question time, be that tomorrow or on Tuesday, because of course we must have all of the sympathy messages. Of course, the first priority of the Parliament when it comes back is to talk about the horrible things that happened in Israel, but when he had the chance to go to a synagogue, no, that had to wait because he was still campaigning in the middle of the country. Now, the media is going to go full Trump on Dutton. I showed you this in the lead up to it, the hate they have for Peter Dutton. They are going to go as hard as they can, and you watch how history will suddenly be twisted, that without bipartisan support, which, by the way, was pulled months before we even knew the wording of the question, pulled, gone, then he knew that he was pushing it uphill. But he kept pushing because he thought that the claps and tweets would get him across. He'll punish regional Australia just like he punishes them when it comes to the renewable policy, manufacturing policy. Oh, he's got some fun coming for the bush, where they just vote no and they vote nats, so who cares? But the biggest way he's going to get is revenge on the people who he thinks wronged him, denied him the spot in history that he so richly deserves out of the greatness of his own heart, the misinformation bill. Now remember, the government will hand regulatory powers to somebody to decide what is and isn't misinformation. Now, defamation, very clear, you can't do that on the internet or on television or radio. But if you argue what the government doesn't like and you use a series of data that they don't like, that's misinformation. And there are some moves on to try to apply this code to the broader media, not just social media. But increasingly, as many people interact with broader media via social media, via the internet, they're going to pretend that they're cracking down on crazy things on Facebook. No. What they're really cracking down on is you being able to see on platforms like Facebook, like YouTube, like X, like, dare I even say, TikTok and Instagram, the stuff that government doesn't want you to hear. And remember the shifting sands about what misinformation is. Now, literally, everyone from media organisations of the left all the way through the Human Rights Commission say this is a bad bill, there's a problem here. But he has a path through the Parliament. All of his MPs will back it, which means it goes to the lower house. And you don't think the Greens are going to want to double down and do this as well? Watch that as the revenge play from Albo. Meantime, 5 things we learnt after this referendum. 1, the arrogance of Albo. 2, the media didn't listen. It truly didn't listen, and it didn't reflect an honest conversation and the reality of the debate. Now, the polls, I repeat, around June started to show that this thing was going below 50%. But increasingly, the media found ways of not talking about the no case, they were just talking about the strength of the yes case. They constantly went out of their way to turn appearances like the one from Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price at the National Press Club from being about what she actually said to a conversation about colonisation. Now, of course, the great difference between, say, a Lydia Thorpe and a Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price is Lydia Thorpe thinks we only need to talk about one day and one day only, and that is, of course, 1788 or maybe even 1770, unless we talk about day one, then nothing gets fixed. Well, of course, Jacinta is focused where I think 60% of the country ended up landing. What are you going to do tomorrow? But the media, not interested. Remember, we showed you that when they had the choice to cover her speech, the one that now the extreme majority of Australia voted for in every single state, her worldview was what they agreed with in relation to this referendum. Oh, no. Let's cover the symbolism of a very well-meaning, deeply loving man who decided to walk from Melbourne to Canberra because that was the convenient message the Prime Minister wanted to play. We showed you that. Remember the 2 minutes of news, 1 minute of fluff, 15 seconds of Jacinta, but nothing to do with her speech, just the question of colonisation. Over and over and over again this happened. And then what about the little spurt of aggro that we got from one of those that will now go full Trump on Dutton, the one that will try to, again, pump up things like the misinformation bill, Laura Tingle over there at the ABC. Now, remember, she's effectively a commentator. Now, the ABC is not supposed to have them, but she's there as an analyst, you see. So she's allowed to basically do what I do each and every night, but she does it sort of a different way, doesn't she? Now, she, among other things, talked about the false balance of the coverage, that we had to give 50% to no. No. In this world, where if I think it's right, despite the fact that it's contested, I will just pretend one half of the argument doesn't exist. This is how you get to a scenario where people are surprised by results. Unless you actually tell them what's happening with the polling, well, then one of two things can always happen. Yes or no, Trump or Biden, Clinton or Trump, Brexit or no Brexit, Morrison or Shorten could actually take place. And no matter the fact that you may agree or disagree with whatever those decisions are, they're not a shock if you're actually paying attention to the data leading up to those election days. Now, here's some of the reaction, in part from the media yesterday.
We're about uniting this country and moving forward
Warren,
and fixing the problems that we have in Aboriginal
just going to interrupt
communities.
you there because
I'm not going to sit here and cop lies from people.
Well, we're not going to sit here and take you abusing a national treasure like Marcia Langton, who never said that Australians were racist.
And you must accept
and her words were twisted. I'm going to stop you there, Warren.
People make the decisions.
I think, well, we've just seen who Warren Mundine is.
Yes, that's right.
Do you have anything further to add?
I didn't say that Australians are racist.
For those who perhaps don't understand the lives of Indigenous Australians, who don't understand the inequity, the challenges, to then try and understand this proposal and how that could potentially fix some of these things, it was too much for them to get their head around.
There were lies and there was misinformation through the campaign.
Unbelievable, right? Now, again, you can have a view, that's fine, and I'm fine when people wear their heart on their sleeve, but we can't cover both sides of the argument, not at all acceptable, because there is no other side of the argument. Well, guess what? There was, and Australians chose it. And then I've got to say this, the 6 p.m. news tonight, its treatment of this vote, after this forever conversation that we've had, was a disgrace. Because we all know the result that they wanted. You saw it in all of their sort of funereal coverages last night. Channel 7 did lead the news with this story, and I'll get to that being a contrast in a moment. But the reality was they did it for just 4 minutes. That's it. Literally, hot days get longer coverage on the 6 p.m. news than 60% of the country going to the polls and telling us their view on this issue. And Channel 9 didn't even run the story as their lead story tonight. Instead, a protest where, frankly, nothing happened was their lead story tonight, not the national vote on The Voice.
Tonight, thousands of pro-Palestinian supporters take over Hyde Park, police on edge. Fresh plans to evacuate Australians out of Israel amid bloodshed in the mass exodus of Gaza. Australia's worrying new travel advice for Lebanon. The Prime Minister's voice silenced as the referendum is rejected.
Seriously? Come on. A protest where nothing happened. It's not to say all these stories aren't important, but it's pretty obvious what the lead story is tonight. Unbelievable. All right, another example here. Arrogance of Albo. Media didn't listen. The polls were right. News Poll's final one, once it took undecideds out, was 60-40 in favour of no. So they got it right. But some of the polls played games. Now, remember, for months and months and months, the Essential poll didn't have undecideds in there. They just forced people to a yes-no position. And then once, surprisingly, undecideds were counted, it started to show no was rising. In the Resolve poll, they only ever spoke about the strength of the yes case. They never really emphasised in any of its analysis what was happening with the no vote. Now, the whole thing is this. Again, you can have your view, you can say what's right and you can say what's wrong, but we need to have certain sources that we can hang our conversations off. Don't interpret the poll, just tell me, up, down, undecided, yes, no, undecided. Don't put in the headline, the yes case is this or the yes case is that. Just literally ignore the one that is now starting to replace what had been the majority position at the start of this thing. Arrogance of Albo. Media didn't listen. Polls were right, but they played some games. What does this thing actually mean about the next election? Well, I'll be very honest with you, not a huge amount, however. It doesn't say nothing about the next election. Now remember, 29 seats around the country, they voted yes. You would imagine these 29 places are going to be the places where the let's blame Dutton, let's blame misinformation, this is where the real heart of the aggro is going to be going into the next election. But 122 seats voted no. Interestingly, of the 20 seats that changed hands in the 2022 election, obviously moving away from the Libs, some from Labor, but where did they go? Well, right down the middle. 10 voted no, 10 voted yes. Now, interesting to note in all of this, let's have a look here at some of these states and their breakdowns, right? Now, Higgins, Wentworth, Kooyong, North Sydney, Goldstein, Brisbane, Griffith, Ryan, McKellar, Curtin, they all voted yes. So Higgins, which probably will end up being a Teal seat, voted yes. Wentworth is a Teal seat, Kooyong is a Teal seat, North Sydney's a Teal seat, Goldstein is a Teal seat, Brisbane, Griffith, Ryan are Green seats, McKellar is a Teal seat, but that's only just, Curtin's a Teal seat. So again, Lib's unlikely to be able to flip anything there in the next little while, so their chances of getting to 76, pretty damn unlikely. However, remember, the government is only in majority by a couple of seats. So if they lose a couple of seats, guess what may well happen? They go into minority government, and that will be hell for the country. Now, of course, Western Australia, where Labor won a whole bunch of seats, if they even lose 2, maybe 3, that would be enough to put the government back into a minority position. Pearce, Hasluck, Robertson, Fowler, Swan, Reid, Boothby, and remember, even Bennelong, which at one point was looking like it was going to go yes, they all went no. So there is some path there for the Libs to be able to take some anger. Maybe there'll be some residual anger about the Prime Minister going through and putting the country through all of this. If that's going to pay off anywhere, it'll pay off in Western Australia. If they'll be punished in the places where the green bits will get greener, meaning Labor could lose a seat in South East Queensland. Again, the most likely outcome here, in my view, is that scenario of the Labor Party going into minority at the next election. Now, finally, the arrogance of Albo. The media didn't listen. The polls were right, but they played games with the information. What it means for the next election, and finally, for the left, democracy only works when you win. Now, remember some of the insults that came out from that Yes campaign? The insults that they thought when it was still 60-40? Well, of course, this was how they behaved.
What that asinine slogan is saying is if you're a dinosaur, a dickhead, who can't be bothered reading, then vote no.
Every time the no case raises one of their arguments, if you start pulling it apart, you get down to base racism. I'm sorry to say it, but that's where it lands. Or just sheer stupidity.
drumming up outrage, trying to start a culture war.
It is importing Trump-style politics to Australia.
Yes or no. It's that simple. I wrote yes. My daughter was there. She got it. She's 9. She said, I can't believe anyone would vote no to this.
The no campaign strategy, a deliberate strategy of promoting fear over fact.
This is a sign of just how low the no campaign is willing to go. And I call on Peter Dutton today to condemn this. If he doesn't, then he is complicit in this lie.
When lefties win, it's a revolution for the ages. When they don't get what they want, it's just the start of a national conversation. Watch what happens, because it is going to get wilder from here. I think that many of the yes advocates that were playing polite during this campaign are going to start to associate themselves more with the black sovereign movement. But I think the majority of the country will want to be with Jacinta Price and practical outcomes, practical solutions, and yes, audited where money goes. And there's a smart-ass Labor Party response to that, which is, well, didn't the Liberal Party, weren't they in charge of this money for the past 10 years? Yep. And guess what? It was misspent. And the 10 years before that, and the 10 years before that, and the 10 years before that, and the 10 years before that. We've got a lot to get to tonight and a great panel to do so with. That's my thoughts. Keen to hear yours. Send me an email, paul@skynews.com.au. Thanks for joining us on a Sunday night. Sunday night mega panel after a mega event that, of course, was apparently the fourth most important story according to the 6 p.m. news in Sydney tonight. Come on Channel 9. Stephen Conroy, Labor legend, who no doubt will say that this is the greatest victory the Prime Minister's ever had. Michael Kroger, who, despite the fact that it's getting slightly warmer, still's holding on to winter in Victoria. Caroline Marcus, who brings the ladies' touch to the man cave, and the wonderful Hollie Hughes, who's done it all and a whole lot more in the past few months. She's, of course, a senator from New South Wales. Now, guys, we will get into the methodical parts of all of this. I'll try to split it all up so we'll sort of have many arguments within arguments. We're going to unpeel the onion here, but I want to get the quick headline bumper sticker version from all of you, and I'll start with you, Michael. Why did we vote no?
Australians don't want to be divided by race forever. They didn't know what they were voting for. The Aboriginal Affairs Minister couldn't explain it. They provided no detail whatsoever. Australians didn't want to be abused by the Yes campaigners as racists and D-heads and idiots. And they don't think having a Canberra-based voice is the way of improving the lives of Indigenous Australians, and the Yes campaign provided no information, no evidence whatsoever that a Canberra-based voice would improve the lives on the ground of Indigenous Australians. That's basically why.
This is it. Caroline, 60-40. Why did it go from one to the other?
I got to say, just giving myself some credit, I did call this on your show early on. Even when it was 2/3 ahead, I said there is no way. I mean, historically speaking, referendums just do not get up in this country without bipartisan support. But even then, I think this was always going to be a tough win, and for many of the reasons that Michael pointed out. But essentially, the Yes campaign lost it as much as the No campaign won it. It wasn't about misinformation. It was about no information, or very, very little information. And Australians did not want to put something into permanence that they didn't know what it would look like or if it would work.
Stephen, 60-40. Why did we vote that way?
Well, I think Freshwater, who had a very good weekend with both the New Zealand poll that they picked as well as this one, their polling late last week said the two major reasons why people weren't going to vote for it were cost of living and the fact that the more they knew about it, the less they liked it. I mean, I do have some difficulty with the arguments being made by some on the Yes case who are saying, you know, all this misinformation. I mean, that's what Malcolm Turnbull said in 2016.
Yes.
And we all laughed at him and said, grow up. So I don't think you can put this down purely to misinformation. I mean, nearly 70% of the people were in favour of it 12 months ago. They got less informed over the 12 months. Some of this,
that's a great point.
Some of this doesn't quite up. So I think people just need to be honest about what went wrong, and there's a fair few things went wrong. But I think Freshwater picked it in both cases. Cost of living went from a small issue 12 months ago to a major issue today. And the more people found out, that there wasn't enough information, they didn't vote for it, according to Freshwater.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Hollie, again, headline, and then we'll get into all of the little things here in our full Brady Bunch attire.
Mate, you know I've been a no. I've been a no the whole way. I spent a lot of nights with you and Joe Hildebrand, and I said to you from the beginning, Australians were going to say no to this because Australians do not believe in racially dividing this country. We don't believe in permanent victimhood. And I watched Stephen Conroy. Steve, my heart breaks for you. I watched you last night on Sky, struggling for air. I see you tonight. Mate, this is Albo's absolute debacle. He is the one that pushed this through. Australians were never, ever going to agree with it. And you know, Albo needs to own it, woe to go. He's the one that pushed it through. He's the one that chose to push through with a question that we even said to him, we will support recognition, but this whole executive government rubbish needs to go. He decided to ignore getting bipartisan support. There would have been universal support for recognition. Albo pushed forward under his hubris, and his arrogance is what has brought this undone, and he owns it 100% of the way.
Yeah, let's get to that. The price that Albo pays, whether he pays any, again, I pointed out about the next election, if you're really trying to find a tea leaf, it is. Maybe Labor is looking towards minority government. How does that happen? Because maybe something in South East Queensland gets a little greener. Maybe something in Victoria goes from Labor and Higgins to Teal. And Western Australia could be the position where a couple of things flip. If all of that happens, of course, they're in the minority. But, Stephen, what price does the Prime Minister pay? I mean, his speech last night, first couple of minutes all seemed to be fairly on the line, and then the wobble started, and basically sort of, passive-aggressive call-out of Peter Credlin, passive-aggressive call-out of all the people who simply disagreed with him, like 60% of the country.
Well, look, I mean, firstly, there are some who are suggesting that, he should resign because he forced this vote on the country. I'm not sure that, democratic votes are things that you resign over. So I think
David
he made
Cameron
a commitment that he would do it. He made a commitment that he would do it. He made it a priority. I'm sure he's hurting tonight at a personal level, but he's also a professional. And he knows that he will now need to be focused on the issues that ordinary Australians are talking about at the moment. So I would anticipate over the next few months that the government will be very focused on what they call the bread and butter issues. But also, right now we have some major significant international issues. So there's plenty of meaty topics for the federal government to be talking about that are going to be front of discussions around dinner tables.
Yeah, I mean, Michael, what price does Albo pay? Does he pay any, or basically because he'll be able to skip through this week's question time and then he's off playing international diplomat, that he's able to walk past $300 and whatever million dollars and 60% of the country and all the Labor states that have state governments all still turning on this Labor proposition?
I don't think he'll be able to walk away from it, mate. John Howard used to say that in the end the decision was his. And when Mark Dreyfus came back from the Aboriginal Working Group and said they want to have a voice to the executive government, Albo should have said no. Albo should have had the political antenna to say no, that's a bridge too far. The fact that Albo didn't do that, I contrast that with what Hawke or Keating would have done. If their attorneys general, Evans or McClellan, whoever it was at the time, had come back and put that extreme proposition, certainly to Hawke, his antenna would have been, no, this is a bridge too far. So what does it mean? It means the Labor Party have got to have lost a lot of confidence in him to sell anything, and certainly the electorate have lost confidence in him. He tried to sell something which he couldn't explain, which he hadn't read. And boy, $400 million later, he's got one of the worst results in history. He's
gone up 100 in 5 minutes.
He's been absolutely thumped.
We're waiting for postals to come.
You know, and the way he campaigned, he campaigned terribly. He treated the electorate with complete contempt, and I think he suffered a very serious loss last night.
Yeah, I mean, Caroline and Hollie, we'll sort of open it up again to everyone here. But again, the sort of the kit gloves approach that much of the media's had to the analysis here. Okay, so he took 60-40 and turned it into 40-60. He had an opportunity to split questions.
It won't be 40-60. You wait till pre-polls and postals come in. The yes vote is going to have a 3 in front of it.
Okay.
And they'll be lucky if it's a 3-8, 3-7, because it is going to be a 3 in front of the yes vote. This is an absolute debacle for Albanese. There is absolutely no way, and I am appalled to hear Stephen Conroy say that now it's time for the Prime Minister to turn his ideas, his attention to bread and butter issues like cost of living. I'm sorry, where has his attention been? This is why Australians have lost faith in this government and this Prime Minister, is because they're not interested in what is important to them. They haven't been interested in cost of living. They've absolutely gone out on a limb with their energy policy and their trillions of dollars they're putting into this whole new energy grid, whilst they've been focused on the voice, not on the families. And you look, go outside the teal seats, go outside the inner city, go to the suburban seats, the regional and the rural seats. Every single one of them was a no, because they are focused on cost of living pressures and how they put food on the table, keep the lights on and pay the school fees. And this government has no interest in that. They're only interested in their virtue signalling and their hubris, of which Albanese made the voice part of his key first-term platform.
Yeah, let's talk about Jacinta Price. Had the chance to see her in person last night, and apart from the exhaustion at the end of a campaign, certainly she and Warren Mundine have represented a group of people a certain group of people that have been leading the conversation for a long time, have ignored, pushed to one side and basically steamrolled over. Well, surprise, surprise, they were able to, in many ways, get their revenge on the same group of people that have been around largely since the 90s. She, in part, yesterday said that it's time for some new voices, new faces here to start taking on the conversation. Now, whether those new faces are Lydia Thorpe and Thomas Mayo, we'll see, but this is what she said.
I think so.
I think it's time for a new era in Indigenous policy, in the Indigenous narrative. We have to step away from grievance. Attempting to bring about change through grievance has evidently got us nowhere.
Now, Caroline, again, what I'm fascinated by is the what's next, right? So several significant Indigenous leaders have disappeared for a week. They're going to go into a week of silence, flags at half-mast on certain council buildings around the place here. And yes, Lydia Thorpe claiming it as a victory for the Black Sovereign movement. OK, does she want to meet some of the people who voted no? 60%, I'm not entirely sure that they want to go back to the day one conversation. But what do you think about what Jacinta says? Because I think that literally millions of people have reconnected with the issue, as Matt Cunningham said, and I tell you what, whose lens they view it through, Jacinta Price's, not Marsha Langton's.
I mean, if there's one winner out of this whole referendum, it is Jacinta Price. I mean, the number of people who are now viewing her as serious potential in the future for a prime ministerial candidate is, I mean, testament to her strength throughout what has been an extremely trying campaign, where people have, even to the point, I know last night's function, she had to stay in a hotel room right up until the last point, and it had to be so small in a private area because of the threats that she was receiving. So people admire her for her strength for speaking out. And her press club speech, where she really focused on the real issues.
But they didn't talk about it. It was the question about colonialism.
Well, exactly. But the way that she handled that question was so clever and
I'm a double
witty
victim.
And exactly. And people are still talking about that now. I think that not only is she future leadership material in terms of government, but she's certainly now viewed as a real Indigenous leader. I mean, she was already before,
Correct.
but the
Also,
mainstream.
I mean, look, again, a few people, when I was around this yesterday, the media types, where does it go? What does Dutton say? What Dutton says is, if you make me Prime Minister, she's the minister. She's the one in charge, all right? And I think some people find that more comforting than the sort of scare that I think many of those media people were talking amongst themselves yesterday. We'll continue with this in a moment. Quick break, back with more. There is other stuff around, but how do we not discuss? A national vote that wasn't no, it was hell no. More in a sec. Thank you very much for watching Power Panel with us this evening, and a big announcement before the end of the show about something massive that we'll be doing by this time next week, and you get to help me out with it. But let's continue the conversation right now with Senator Hollie Hughes, former senator, and isn't he so happy the term former is in front of it right now? None other than Stephen Conroy, potential at one point in time senator, and for all of our loss, it wasn't the case for the wonderful Michael Kroger, and well, future Governor General. Why not? Let's give her the full bump. None other than Caroline Marcus here at Sky News. So, Michael, let's talk about how the Teals got tealer, the Greens got greener, and Western Australia becomes, if you're trying to find signs for the next election, be it next year or after, that WA might be the place to take a couple of seats off them. But the Teals got tealer, mate. Does this mean now the Libs are done, don't even think about trying?
No, it doesn't. Look, those electorates which know most about Aboriginal affairs voted heavily no, and those that know least about Aboriginal affairs voted yes. So in the Teal seats, they don't have any Aboriginal communities. They don't even have any Aboriginals. I mean, in North Sydney, there are 606 Aboriginals.
Wow.
In Kooyong, there are 268 out of 150,000. In Goldstein, there's 245. In Wentworth, 618, and in Curtin, there's 886. These people in these Teal seats, God love them, they know nothing about Aboriginal affairs. They have no Aboriginal communities. They have no answers. Most of them have never been to an Aboriginal community. So they voted for something which they don't fully understand, because no one fully understands what they were being sold. And those people that know most about how to deal with Aboriginal issues voted 70% plus no. So the message to the Teal seats is, listen to the people that know something about the issue. It's all very well to be wealthy and in the inner city and not know any Aboriginal people and never having been to a community, but we shouldn't as a country say all the Teal seats voted a certain way. They know nothing about Aboriginal affairs, mate. Nothing. Nothing at all. So all the press and all the coverage is, the Teals did this, or the Liberal Party and trouble, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. For goodness sake, mate. They're expressing a view, they know nothing.
And good on you for your stats. I mean, but this is the thing.
I'll tell you what, I'd love Jacinta Price, Monique Ryan in Kooyong. You should invite Jacinta Price into your electorate, and all the Teal seats should, and hold a public meeting so Jacinta can explain to your electorates why they should have voted no, because they obviously are completely out of step with the majority of Australians.
Stephen, I said it on air last night
because... better still, Michael, maybe they could go out with Jacinta to Alice Springs and actually experience some of it firsthand.
Absolutely.
Right, I mean, this is just white guilt played wrong. They need to get, if they've got all this money, they've got their electric vehicles, get in your Tesla, off you go, drive across the Hay Plain, out to Alice Springs, whatever you need to do. And how about you go and go up to Moree. I'll give you some addresses. There's a great motel up there. Go and stay at the Moree Spa Inn, hang out with the Chakotas, off you go. Go up and actually experience these communities and stop lecturing to the rest of Australia from your high horse of so-called intellectual platitudes. For God's sake, if I heard once more people with a university degree, I got 2 of them, and I voted no, and I did an awful lot for the no campaign, because I'm got enough experience in these communities to know that what was being proposed was rubbish, that we weren't going to perpetuate victimhood in the Constitution, and Indigenous people didn't want it. So leave Wentworth, leave Kooyong, Get in your Tesla, drive up to Alice Springs, drive up to Moree, and they'll show you what it's really about.
You can probably do better water skiing than I did in Moree. Good people. Stephen,
mate, obviously.
Again, the tea leaves and what they mean, right? Now, I pointed this out on air last night. Bob Hawke took 6 referenda, lost them all, but never lost the Prime Ministership. Obviously, John Howard, 99, Republic referendum, got the result he wanted, but still lost on his watch, didn't have to hand in the gun and badge. What do you read as any potential tea leaves right here? Do you, what's your thought here about, is it the signs of WA being worried for Labor? Is it the signs of the Teals being locked off to the Libs? What do you see as a tea leaf in this?
Look, I mean, starting WA, Labor's result over there was extraordinary. I would love to think we could have put aside the voice or any other particular issue, I would love to think we could hold on to all of those seats. But political realism says to me that we're going to struggle to hold on to all of those seats. I hope I'm wrong, but we're probably going to lose a couple. Then you come across to dealing with the Teal seats. And here's where all the noise we've been hearing tonight from the no voters and the no campaigners on the panel ignores electoral maths. Those seats voted strongly. Those Teal seats voted strongly. They are not winnable in the next election. Maybe one of them, but the Liberals need to win all 5 or 6 and not lose any more. They are more likely to lose another seat to the Teal than they are to win Teal seats. That means Peter Dutton's chances of becoming the Prime Minister are almost 0, because this fanciful idea that you're going to win 20 seats without the Teal seats and win government by taking 20 off Labor is just a comedy value, because the seats that you start moving past when you go 20 Labor seats on Labor's side of the pendulum, not the Teal seats, you're in primary votes of 25 to 30%. That means to win those seats, they've got to jump their primary vote 15% and then hope they can get across the line on preferences. This is not going to happen. You can point to the same-sex marriage referendum, where a whole range of safe Labor seats, very safe Labor seats.
Blaxland's not
voted
flipping.
no.
Chifley's not flipping.
Yeah. So again, they voted no, and then despite the fact that many MPs said they'd respect the vote, those Labor MPs in those seats still said no, even though our electorates voted no, we're voting yes. And they still won the seats.
Yeah, but Stephen, you want to talk about the Teal seats. You know, if we talk about Labor losing a few seats in WA, it goes into minority government. Those Teal seats that are traditionally Liberal seats, they then have to make a choice. And can I tell you, mate, they choose Labor government, that is the end of them. You go into Kooyong, you go to Wentworth, you go to North Sydney, you go to any of these seats and say, hey, we're going to back a Labor government, that's the end of those Teals. So
I agree, but that's a two-election strategy.
That's where I'm going to disagree with you, Hollie. That's where I'm going to disagree with Hollie. They are voting on issues. Sorry.
All right, I apologise. We can all keep going, and the joy is we've got a whole week to do it. Caroline, I apologise. I'll be nicer to you next time. I'll give you even more time. Thank you, guys. Do appreciate it. Plenty more to talk about, as we will all week long here on Paul Murray Live. Something very special I have to announce after the break. Don't go anywhere. News in a couple of minutes' time, but I've got something big for you next. As you know, we go around the country with Our Town, and this time next week we will be in Mildura. Now, I would like to partner up with Humpty Dumpty, which is a fantastic charity, to leave a lasting legacy of our time in Mildura. Now, what this means is that we need to raise money for equipment that will help sick babies in hospitals. Believe it or not, Mildura needs a baby incubator. This is something that means when kids in their very earliest of hours, it means things like oxygen can be controlled, humidity, temperature. This means that infections don't come and they will end up with a healthy life. We need $40,000 to make that happen by Sunday. If you want to kick off the donations, go to our socials, but follow that website, humpty.org.au/regional-fundraiser, regional fundraiser at Humpty Dumpty, because this time next week, I want to give Mildura and its hospital what it wants, and I need your help. We'll start that in earnest right now and talk about it all week. Here's the latest news.